Hey, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm your host, Mark O'Brien, Director at CM First Group. Thank you very much for to the CA Broadcom community for holding today's last of the decade webinar on CA2E roadmaps, robots, and SQL. It should be a poll question, as often we start off these things with a poll question. And the first poll question is, which languages are you coding / generating embedded SQL? We have 5 options. You see the answers. So pretty much the audience split between 2E and Plex and hand-coded RPG or COBOL. Only 9% are not using SQL. Very interesting. I'm not going to introduce their first speaker on today's webcast. Please remember, if you've got any questions that you see during the presentations, please put them into the console on your dashboard, and we'll use them later in Q&A session. So I want to introduce Raghu Daita, who will present a short talk about the CA2E roadmap, including the upcoming Q1 refresh pack. Then I'll be followed by lightning talks. First one on robotic process automation by John Rhodes, and then CA2E SQL by Eamon Foley, and then a Q&A session. So anyway, let's bring our first speaker on board. Good morning, or good evening, Raghu.
Good morning, Mark. Thank you. So welcome to this lightning talk on CA2E product update. We'll take a look at a brief look at this roadmap for CA2E. We'll then look at the features that are coming up in the next refresh pack. So we look at these how they have been implemented, the details of the features and how they have been implemented. We'll look at some supplementary items that concern the upcoming refresh pack, and we'll also spend a couple of minutes on the validation program as well. Which has already shared this in the previous meetings as well with the entire community. So the middle box here, the planned v8.7.1 is the list of features that we'll be sending out as part of the upcoming refresh pack. So if you look at that, we have 2 features that are related to REST enablement, and we have 2 features which are related to improving the SQL support within 2E. So we'll just take a brief look at the REST enablement related features. The first one is related to having meaningful names on web services. So just to make it clear, these meaningful names for web services would cater to both the earlier SOAP services as well as the newly implemented REST services. The second one is around RESTful web services deployment. So that's something new that we have introduced into the product. The next 2 features are related purely to SQL support. The first one is optimized for n rows, and the next is data type access by file type. So that's a brief look at the roadmap for 8.7.1. If you look at the next column, the one here, this talks about the under consideration section. So this is for the next, these are the items that are planned for the next refresh pack, the one that comes after 8.7.1. So these, if I might share, all of these features have come up from the $100 stack ranking exercise that was carried out at the previous conference that happened in April 2019. Created SQL to optimize SQL retrieval. So just a brief about this idea. So typically there would be scenarios wherein we would have large number of qualifying rows for a given selection. However, when we only a small subset of that large number of qualifying records would be typically shown onto a screen. But in the general scenario, what would happen is we would have to wait until all the records are first loaded into the buffer, and then the screen gets displayed. So in order to reduce the wait time for the user, we have implemented this optimize for n rows clause into the generated SQL. So by doing this, what would happen is when the records are when the selection of records are getting loaded into the buffer, only a small subset, denoted by the number n, get loaded into the buffer, and the screen gets displayed to the user. So the wait time for the user gets reduced drastically by virtue of this optimize for n-rows clause. So if you look at the details of implementation, currently these changes have been implemented for the edit file function type only. So based on the user feedback, they will be extended to other function types as well. We have included two new model values as part of this. The first is called YOPTROW, which basically talks about whether the optimize for n-rows clause should get generated or not. And it has two values. One is yes and the other is no. And the other one is YOPTNBR, which is a value contains the actual which says for how many records do we need to optimize the SQL for. So we have implemented it as a function for function option as well for the edit file function. So that would have three possible values. One would be M, which denotes the model value. One would be Y, which denotes yes, and one would be N, which would denote no. So based on the value of this specific function option, the generator would decide whether the optimize for n-rows clause has to get generated or not, and if it has to get generated, what should be the value of n. So that is a brief about this particular feature. We'll now move on to the next one. So this is controlling database access RLA versus in migration mode. Typically, what customers have shared with us is that when they were doing this mass migration from DDS to SQL at a single go, they have been facing performance issues. So, there have been requests to try and help ease this problem of migration from DDS to SQL in an incremental and phased manner, but still try to get the best out of the application. So one of the ways to do this is to have the ability to generate both RLA and SQL type access in the same function, such that the database access would get generated. So let's say my file is based on DDS, then for that particular file, the RLA access would get generated. And if my file is SQL type, and then for that particular file, the SQL access would get generated. So up until now, we only were able to have the entire function in RLA access or the entire function in SQL access. But as part of this feature, we now have that mix and match ability for our functions. So if you take a look at the implementation details, the changes are currently implemented for the edit file and the execute external function types only. And we have made changes for the RPG and RP4 generators only at this point in time. Based on the user feedback, this would be extended to the other function types and other generators, like including COBOL if needed. We have included a new function level generation option. We are calling it B, which represents the mixed mode. We already have M, which stands for model val, D, which stands for DDS, S, which stands for SQL, and A, which stands for access path value. So this B would be a new addition to this set of function option value. We don't have a model level option at this time, so it's granular at the function level itself. So some key changes that you would notice is mode function option is set to B. By default, an SQL type source member would get created. So even though all my functions inside my all the files that are being used inside my function are using RLA, since I'm setting my function option to be, an SQL type source member would get created. So that's one of the things that we need to keep in mind. And then based on the referenced file mode, the corresponding file access would be. So RLA type access would get created for DDS type files and DDL type files, where the DDL DBA model value is set to star RLA. And SQL type access would be created for SQL type files and DDL type files when the DDL DBA is set to star SQL. So that's how this particular feature has been implemented. And then moving on to the next one. This is about the RESTful support. So as of this, we'll be covering both the meaningful names part as well as the RESTful web services support part. So up until now, TUI only had the ability to deploy SOAP-based web services, and even on the deployed web service, the names of the parameters were like not really meaningful names. A third-party web service client developer could not really understand what those field names were, what those field names really meant. So meaningful names was something that was badly needed for the web services in TUI. So that is something that we have taken cognizance of and implemented as part of this release. In addition to that, we have also implemented the RESTful web services support as well. So we'll just look at the implementation details. We have included new model values for both meaningful names and RESTful web services support. They've been close to around 7 new model values that we had to introduce for making for this particular feature. So 2 new types of web services can now be deployed, both the SOAP and the REST implementations that we have provided. One is RESTful default. We're calling it star REST DFT, stands for RESTful default, and the other is star REST config, star REST CFG. So we'll talk a little bit about it in subsequent slides. So yeah, so for the SOAP services, meaningful names is not mandatory, so that is for backwards compatibility. You could still have SOAP services with the product generated names as on the end client, on the end web service. But for RESTful web services, meaningful names, we have made it as mandatory because we felt it doesn't make sense to have the REST service with with names which are not really meaningful. For now, only one input source type, path underscore param, has been implemented. So there are 4 other types of parameters, input source types that IBM provides via the integrated web services server. So we would be implementing them based on the feedback in subsequent refresh packs. We have included model support for the meaningful names and the web services type in the processing. We have also enhanced the ycrit ws command to tackle these new parameters, the meaningful names and the web service types. The install web service scripts that IBM provides, the processing within 2A has been enhanced to take advantage of the new install scripts that IBM is providing. We have introduced it so that this RESTful web services can actually become a reality. So that's been something newly introduced. We have introduced a couple of commands. One is for meaningful PCML that will actually help in ensuring meaningful names on the end web service. And the other is for generating a properties file for the RESTful web service. So these are 2 commands that we have introduced. In addition to all of these, we have also ensured that all the other ancillary areas, such as function copying, deletion, the remote web services deployment, ycopy model object processing, all of these have also been enhanced to reflect the new REST services requirements. So that has also been taken care of. In the interest of time, I'll not spend too much time on this particular screen. So some of these modes of service web services that we can now have. The first is SOAP. The second is REST default, as I mentioned earlier. So by virtue, so this is basically a default mode for REST web service using model values and module naming standards for the resource method information. So by resource method information, I basically mean the various REST attributes, such as what kind of a HTTP method should a procedure be associated with, what should be the URI path for that specific procedure, what are the allowed input types, what are the allowed output types. So that is nothing but the resource method information. So for the REST default mode, typically the name of the module has to be in this particular format, it has to be the HTTP verb that we want the module to be associated with, underscore the name of the module that needs to be used on the URI path. So if for example, if my module name is this and the corresponding model name for my module, I keep it as get underscore students, then when I deploy the service program containing this module as a web service, the HTTP method that is going to be associated with this module would be get, and the name of the URI path for that particular would be slash students. And all the other values around what should be the input type, what should be the output type, all of those are picked up from the model values that I have shown on the previous slide. So the value of virus output, virap input, virap output, etc. Config mode is what you want the specific values for the resource method information to be. So you can actually configure them. We have created two new screen. So this is a screen, the first screen that we have the exported modules for web service operations. So this is something that would come up from my the screen wherein I first defined my. Just a moment, I'm really sorry. Oops. I'm really sorry. Yeah, so that screen would actually come up from there. Oh, man. Yeah, so that screen would actually come up from the screen where I define my web service function. The next screen, the resource method info for procedure. So that is a screen that we could actually access from the exported modules for web service operation screen. And that is where I define the configurable values for each of the HTTP attributes, each of the resource method information for my module, basically. So these are the two new screens that we have introduced as part of this feature. So that is a brief about the features and how they have implemented at this point in time. We'll now move ahead to the next section. The talk about is the installation of the refresh pack. We are now since the one of the key points about having a refresh pack is that the installation should be relatively easier rather than following the traditional product upgrade and the model upgrade kind of a process. So we wanted it to be similar to the the PTF application that we typically do using the yapply PTF command. So we are trying to work towards that. So at this point in time, we are making the changes necessary to use the yapply PTF command itself to install the 8.7.1 release. So if we face any blockers in this process, then we might have to go back onto the traditional mode of upgrading. But for at this point in time, efforts are to ensure that you can use the yapply PTF to upgrade to 8.7.1. Another point about 8.7.1 is that is going to be based on top of cumulative PTF-A that we had released last year. The next point is about the product documentation. So earlier the product documentation was being shipped as part of the product via a bookshelf and PDF files, but now the product documentation has been moved online. So that is the link that you can actually see. But we could see that the links within the documentation have been mixed up relatively. So what we are doing is we are working with the documentation team as well to ensure that all of that is streamlined. We are also planning to create scenario documents which would actually show all the new validations that have been introduced for the RESTful Web Services deployment and the new screen flow and some sample installations for the REST Web Services. So that is, so in addition to, so the last point that we wanted to talk about is about the validation program. So we are planning to have a validation program once we are at reasonable levels of completion for the current features. So at this point in time, we are thinking sometime in the month of January, or so this would be a good time frame for that. But then we cannot really commit on to that at this point in time. But we would be making an announcement on the same on the forums as soon as we have a confirmation of a possible date. I would request all the customers who would like to sign up for the validation program to please go onto that particular link that we have placed on screen. And then you could sign up for the Plex 2E validation program. Thank you.
You're welcome, Raghu. We'll want to get control turned back here. We have another poll question for you while we're getting ready for our next speaker. Which is, what are your CA2E upgrade plans? Got 4 different options here. Either you plan to upgrade as soon as possible, or you're going to test, join the program on the link there, test and upgrade it over the next 6 months. Some of you may decide to upgrade, but do it in the second half or later of 2020, or you'll likely not upgrade. So looks like people are going to be upgrading in the second half of the year, although about 2/3 of you will upgrade at some point in 2020, and about 1/4 of you are not planning to upgrade as well. So anyway, thank you for your participation on that. I'd now like to introduce John Rhodes. He's going to be talking about robots and the importance of robotics in software development.
Thank you, Mark. Let's see if I can get the
yeah,
polls off the screen. Yeah, so today I'd like to talk about a subject that's getting a lot of hype these days. It's called robotic process automation, or RPA for short. It's kind of up there, I think, with Bitcoin and blockchain and AI, maybe not quite to those lofty levels, but certainly getting a lot of press and a lot of attention, and a lot of vendors out there with different types of products around RPA. So I wanted to take this time to explain a little bit about what RPA is, what it isn't, and then we'll do a short demonstration so it can more obvious. But it's kind of like what we had in the Industrial Revolution. You know, we started off with an innovation called the assembly line, where humans basically were automated to build things like cars, and they would have their own particular job, and they would do that well. And so cars could be mass produced at a much lower price point and a lot faster than they could when every car was crafted by one person. And that's evolved certainly in a lot of industries, especially automotive, where there's actually a large robotic part of that, where robots are actually doing the mundane work of putting the wheels on and putting the bodies on the cars and all that. So you see a lot of robots in factories, but you also keep seeing humans. And in fact, I read a stat last week that they expect most assembly workers in the US to have a college degree starting next year and beyond. The reason is you're not just, you know, putting things on cars, you're also training these robots and helping the robots get past new models of cars, reprogramming, exception handling, and all that. So you still have humans, maybe it's less humans, but they're doing much higher work than they used to do. So this idea is really starting to come into software as well. Of course, in software, we've always been about automation, but really in reality, a lot of what we do in a lot of places still is very manual. You may look up something in your email, get a bit of information off a PDF that was sent, and then key that into a different system. Maybe that's a 2E system. And then maybe you're taking information from that and putting that into SAP, and then you're firing back an email. So it's still a lot of things that are very process human-centric and can take a lot of time and often are very repetitive. So the benefits of having a bot do that type of work, you know, there are many. Certainly they're going to work 24/7. They're not going to take smoking breaks, bathroom breaks. They're just going to keep at their task until they're told to stop. They don't make mistakes in terms of just miskeying data. We were on a project recently where there's multiple systems involved, And one of the major problems we had was people keying the wrong email address into different systems. You know, you're off by a character, it's the wrong email, suddenly everything doesn't work right and has to be corrected. So robots don't do that. They're quite happy to do things that are very boring, repetitive, and that people just don't want to do. Certainly one like regression testing kind of falls in that category. We've seen a lot of robotics in testing these days. They take instruction well, you can program them and they'll do exactly what you say to a fault, right? And they aren't planning to retire. Okay, like a lot of us, you know, maybe looking towards retirement and looking towards training new folks. Well, they're not going to do that. And if for some reason they did do that, their daily routine is documented, you know, as part of the software, exactly what they do, the steps they go through, the business process that they're executing. It's all out there for them to see, everyone to see. Okay. One key thing here is that RPA is not AI. Okay. Definitely separate terms completely. The bots still need the humans. They need humans to train them and retrain them, program them, handle exceptions. There's a lot of business tasks that require higher levels than what can be programmed without any thought process. Now, at some point in the future, maybe there'll be a lot of AI, and AI will be able to take on some of this human stuff. But that's really right now mostly science fiction in most fields. You know, there's a few things you're seeing out there that are getting into production in AI, but mostly it's science fiction. Mostly it's experimentation. However, the data you're gathering as part of this RPA initiative is very important for training AI in the future. It's like if you don't have the data, you don't have what someone is doing and how long it takes them to do it, then you can't really optimize that using AI techniques, right? So that's kind of the first step towards gathering the data is using RPA. Okay, so why is it becoming more popular now than maybe in the past? And we've had screen automation in the past. It's not really that new. But people are starting to realize that rewriting their large legacy applications is very expensive. If you have a large 2E application or large Plex application, it's going to stay that way for a while. You know, there's an exception there. We have a good product to migrate automatically 2E to Plex, but apart from that, it's really going to be a large manual effort to rewrite your code. You know, a lot of investment. Adopting packages have that same type of investment. There's a lot of risk there, expenses and vendor lock-in. And even building a API layer is not something that you can get for free. Yeah, you know, like we saw Raghu today show some 2E web service generation. That's okay for some simple web services, but the more complex ones take some human architecture and thought to build APIs that, you know, are understandable and mean something to your external partners and internal partners. So it's also not free. So one way people are looking at RPA is to get an immediate quick win, quick hit, because the systems stay the same, the robots work on top of the systems, and the systems don't require them to be changed. Okay, so the robots can be programmed and trained by people that are not hardcore programmers, and you get some immediate value there that these other approaches take some time to pay off. Okay, I got one more slide and we'll do a demo. So here's some typical use cases, kind of low-hanging fruit that we see a lot in organizations we talk to. And one obvious one, user provisioning. So people are hired on, or they become part of a project or part of an organization. Typically, they got to be first put on the security systems like Active Directory, like LDAP, anything else that you're doing there for security. Then they got to be secured in 10 different line of business applications like Salesforce or like Adobe or whatever they happen to be doing. And then what happens when they leave? We got to do all that in reverse. Or if you forget to do that, then you got a big security hole. That person has access to all your data. So this is an area that is usually not very automated to places. And RPA is uniquely positioned to quickly get in and do some work for you. Things like Excel automation is also a strong point for RPA to extract spreadsheets, manipulate them, send them out, get data off spreadsheets, extract data. distributing reports. A lot of people get a lot of reports that they really don't need to see, and they're not getting reports they do need to see. And that's because the distribution process is often antiquated and not very automated. File transfers are another area that I'm sure you automated to a degree, but there is the promise of having these 100% automated where you send the file off, the end party acknowledges it, acknowledges it back, and you close the loop and you send notifications out. And then you have a backup plan if something goes wrong. So sometimes this is humans are heavily involved in these, and it could be automated. And of course, batch processes. Sometimes batch processes have multiple steps where humans have to look at something before they move on to the next step. A lot of times that can be automated with RPA. Okay, so we're going to show a little demo now, and it's going to show some of the typical things that a bot does during his day. You know, he may be reading emails and looking at the attached forms and doing some OCR against it. He's operating line of business apps, could be green screen apps, 2E or Plex apps that are in C++ or Java. Certainly enterprise apps like Salesforce, Oracle, or various help desks that are out there. And then he's transmitting files typically to partners. So these are just a small subset of what's possible for a bot, but we're going to kind of show you how a bot can kind of get in there with some initial training, become productive really within a few days. So with that, I'm going to stop talking here, and I'm going to move this over to Roger Hammer to give a demo.
So we have 3 short demos here for RPA. One of those is Plex Java. The second one will be Plex C++, and the third one will be CA2E. So as we do these demos, you're going to see a series of steps. First one here is going to be starting up the application, logging in, selecting a particular menu, reading data from Excel, and then looping through that data to present that data to the application and save it, much as John mentioned, you know, in the user provisioning. So it's logging in to the application. It's going to step through a couple of menus here, selecting what's in this case called person menu. So in all of this is literally selecting the objects on the screen. This is not just positional kind of selections. This is actually understands the objects and selects them. So I could even move the screen around and it would still select these objects. So there it's found the add option. Now it's going to read the Excel data, 3 rows of data. Now it's going to write that data into the application automatically here and then save each one. We'll just watch it complete here. So one thing you'll notice as we go through this and the other applications, obviously this is a web application. The next one's a native C++ application, and then we'll have a CA2E on the AS400. So we're working in these different environments and everything's still providing everything needed here. Okay, so the second application, C++, this is basically going to take that data that was entered, those 3 rows of data, and this application is going to do a simple delete. So it's going to start the application. Here are the 3 rows. I wanted you to see exactly what rows are going to get deleted. They're going to be slightly hidden here as it runs, but now it's going to start up the application, open up each of those rows of data, and delete them from the application. Simple option, but you can see, you know, the selections within C++ application happening and the removal of this information. Okay, so now you see the bottom 3 rows now are gone from the application database. Now we're going to move on to the CA2E. It's going to start the application, log in. Again, go to the menu, the similar menu as the first Java application. Again, read the Excel data and then loop through those three data elements or data sets and enter that data into the 2E application. Oh, reading the Excel data, now entering it. All right, and there's our three additional persons that were added to the application. And that's the end of the demonstration. If you have questions, as John said earlier, enter them into the chat and we'll take your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger.
So we now have a third poll question. Is about RPA adoption, and if and how are you using RPA or robotic process automation? So you get to choose one. Do you have at least one bot in production? Or second option, have you started an RPA pilot? Or you're sticking to traditional automation, software automation at this time, or automation is not for us? Evidently, ahead of the curve as we often are, in kind of showing new concepts out to the community. So the majority of you are going to just stick to traditional software automation techniques this time. And then about a fourth of you saying that you're probably not going to be automated. And a few customers out there have at least one bot or have started an RPA pilot. So we'd love to hear about more about this, and perhaps at a future webcast we can have a customer give us an update at some point in 2020 on how their RPA plans are taking place. I'd like now to shift your attention to our next talk, which is moving to CA2E SQL access without a version upgrade. And it's Eamon Foley, also known as Tips and Tricks, Senior Consultant from CM First.
So I'll start out, introduce Eamon and introduce concept.
Okay.
So yeah, we're going to talk about embedded SQL with CA2E, which has been a topic for some years now, really. IBM came out with SQL in the 70s, and the CA got pieces of it in the product fairly quickly. But since then, it's been a little slower than a lot of us hope in the community. So we want to show you today, Eamon's going to show you really, is a way to move more quickly into the SQL world and not have to wait necessarily for what CA is doing to get to all the benefits of SQL. And get pretty excited about this. So everybody knows the benefits of SQL. I mean, IBM's been beating the drum on this for I don't know how many years, but 10, 15 years. They've been saying it's the way to go. They're putting all their work and their query engines are going into SQL. They're putting very little into traditional DDS optimizations. You get a lot of benefits around scalability, size of tables, size of rows, size of different objects when you move to SQL. Certainly, potentially, you have a lot of flexibility to add and drop columns. SQL has been widely adopted, so you're training new people on 2E, probably they know SQL and would like to make use of that in their programming. Really, IBM says so, and they invented SQL, and they've been pushing this on the IBM platform for a number of years, as I mentioned, and with some mixed success. But I think we're starting to see a kind of a tipping point where new development is tending towards using SQL and tending away from the old traditional DDS. Okay, and CA has done some things to support that, but here's a big but here. So this is the subject what Abe's going to tell you about. We're using SelectStar in 2E, and SelectStar kind of is the elephant in the room because it's basically a worse development practice for one. I mean, if you go to any kind of programming training, whether it be COBOL or any language, Java, what have you, you don't code your embedded SQL with a SelectStar. Just very bad practice. The reason is that the DBA or anybody can just add columns or take away columns, and some of your code doesn't work, right? So you want to just select the columns that you're using. There's also performance benefits to that approach, just having the columns you're actually using in your business process. Okay, so that's a big problem right now for a lot of people, and that's the reason people have not moved to SQL in the 2E world, but we have a good solution right now. So I'm going to move things over to Eamon to take it away. You ready, Eamon?
All right, thanks, John. We were asked by a client who was planning to move their system from DDS to SQL and also wanted to move their programs from traditional RLA access to SQL for data access. Part of this reasoning was to make use of the ease at which SQL could be used to alter a table, as John said, in this case, adding more columns without having to recompile and reload all of the data. This is especially true for those systems that deal with data in the millions to hundreds of millions of records. Having to rebuild that table from scratch is fairly time-consuming. In addition to that, they also wanted to minimize the impact in recompiling their programs as well. Now, because 2E SQL programs are generated with a star instead of the column names, it presented a particular problem for them. To solve this, we've created a process that rewrites the generated source, replacing that SelectStar with more appropriate column names. So let's take a look here on the screen. I have an example of, in this case, it's a display file showing the traditionally generated SQL access code. I've highlighted it in white just to make it easier for everybody to see. And as you can see, it does a SelectStar from the table. And this is not necessarily the, as a professor of mine would say, it's not that it's the wrong way, it's just not the more right way to do things. While it does get the job done, as John pointed out, any changes to the file will force us to recompile programs that in theory we shouldn't need to. So let's take a look at this same program after it's been run through this process. So here is that same select statement, now generating it with the correct column names. Everything else remained exactly the same. It works. The two programs right now will effectively do the same process and come out with the same result. But the second one is the more correct one. So as we can see these in action, here is our base table. They're working off of the same database table. The same 9 fields are loaded together. And we can see that they are working and doing the exact same result. Loading the data, nothing unusual, no issues with it here. Running the same with the modified code, it works exactly the same way. Now, I'm going to simulate a file change similar to the way Implementer or some of the other change control programs would do it, where it will simply issue an altered table. And I've run my alter table command. Now we'll run the same steps again. In this case, the traditional SelectStar. Sorry, it hadn't finished running. You know, the joy of a live demo is the fact that nothing bad ever happens during a live demo. This worked 5 times when I tested it. All right. Unfortunately, John, there is a problem with my demo. It has, oh. I forgot a step. So here we go, that same select now running with the additional tables, additional columns and tables doesn't work. Our modified select still has no issues, still has no problems. And as we can see, I've added some additional columns to the data, and that's what's causing the original select to blow up, because it's now picking up more columns than it was originally designed to run with. There is still the fundamental limitation that if you update the database, you still have to recompile programs that are updating the data to the database. But I'm hoping that that can also be resolved in a future enhancement for this software. And John, thank you. That's everything I have.
All right, thank you, Eamon.
Great. Now, so we've got one upcoming event I wanted to make everyone on the webcast aware of is that on January 15th, we'll be having another webcast on IBM Power or IBM I, featuring data privacy. There's a new regulation in California that takes place on the 1st of January, similar to GDPR. And there's some other things that you should be keenly aware of, and basically looking at data protection and state-of-the-art data protection on the IBM I. Everybody who's on this or is registered for this webcast will receive notice about this. I think we've sent one out before, but we'll be sending more out. And of course, in mid-March, we'll have our quarterly spring community webinar. She has some feedback on the new 2E pack at that point. And then next time we'll be talking about the fall 2020, the 11th Worldwide Plex 2E Developer Conference, and looking for a location, and looking forward to getting your feedback from that as well too. So thank you everybody for your attention on today's call.
We do have some questions, Mark.
Oh, we do. Okay.
Okay, so I'll take them.
Yeah, if you could take them, John, we'll listen.
So, how did you configure 2E RPA? Roger, you want to talk a little bit about how you automated the 2E function?
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure what you mean by configure, but basically the 2E RPA is walking through the same as the human process would do. It was, of course, executing the command to run the application, making selections, through keyboard input, selecting the menu options, and entering keyboard information into the entry fields, and tabbing through that environment just as any human would. So hopefully that answers the question. If not, follow up with an email. We'll get you more information.
Yeah, and you may be asking, like, what product do we use? We are using, there's several products out there that do RPA, but we're using a product called Help Systems Automate, because it has a really good green screen automation feature, as well as automation features for Plex, C++, and websites and web client, and really all the applications that our customer base typically uses.
Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning that there are lots and lots of task automations that you can do within these products, obviously much more than what we've shown you today. So lots of file manipulations, email manipulations, APIs, lots of controls So lots of functionality in there.
Okay, question probably for Raghu. SQL new features are currently implemented in edit file. Are there plans to do the same in display file functions?
So for now, that's an edit file. So we surely do have plans to extend the same to other functions as well. So based on the feedback that we can get from the community, we can do that in subsequent refresh packs.
Okay, excellent. Okay, ask when will the session be available for viewing? So we should have the video available in a couple days once they're able to edit it. It will go out to everyone on the call that's registered. Also, we'll send out the presentation slides immediately following the webinar. Okay. Question for Eamon. Eamon, I missed the part about the more correct method was able to recognize the new fields you added during the demo. Eamon, I missed the part about the more correct method who was able to recognize new fields you added during the demo. Maybe just recap that, or.
Sure. So with the what happens in the generated code is that the select statement goes out, generates a cursor, loads it with data, and then that data is moved into effectively a data structure that the program can then operate against. Because you're using SelectStar, the cursor is dynamically built and it's picking up all fields in the table, whereas the data structure is only set for what was there when it was originally generated. By doing the column names, even when we're adding additional columns, even though there are additional columns in the table, we're only picking up those same ones that are for the data structure, so the program doesn't go and have issues with the fact that you've added columns and that it's not prepared to handle. And this is actually true for pretty much most of the programming languages, which is why the more correct method for doing a select statement and generating a cursor is by column name, so that if the table is updated later, you don't have to go back to every single program and adjust them to account for these additional columns of data.
Okay, thank you. One last question here. Is there a possibility to define different types of parameters in the REST service? I guess that's for Raghu.
Okay, so in addition to what TUI currently provides, is that the question?
I believe so.
Yeah, so for now we are limiting it to TUI, or the types of parameters that TUI can actually support.
Okay.
So we don't have support for stuff that TUI doesn't support at this point in time.
Okay. We may have a couple other questions, but we'll take those offline because we're running up to the top of the hour. So we can show the final poll.
Fair enough. Yep. So last poll, if you've been on the webcast, you've seen this question before. M means that you'd like to have a meeting about something that you saw today, webcast. I means that you can introduce someone who may be interested in RPA, SQL, or the uplift for TUI. Many people indicate that want to be signed up for the newsletter if they're not already on this. Or lastly, that you want us to talk to someone else at your organization that you know that could receive the message. So thank you very much, and until the next decade, we'll be seeing you. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays, Raghu.
Thank you.